Before we begin, a word. Every voice you are about to hear could belong to a real person, and the next one could be yours. Play them apart and read it aloud at footnotesandfolly.click. Welcome back to Footnotes and Folly, and to Josephus' Antiquities. I am Pemberton. This is Book 17, Part 2, and it is heavy going, so let us be honest about that at the door. First, the trial of Varus, the Roman governor of Syria, sits in judgment, and Antipater, who has talked his way out of everything his whole life, weeps and swears and calls on God, until a cup of his own poison, tried upon a condemned prisoner, answers for him. He is convicted, and kept in chains to await his father's pleasure. And then, as Herod lies dying of a disease Josephus describes in pitiless detail, we come to the golden eagle. Two revered teachers of the law, Judas and Matthias, tell their young students that it is a glorious thing to die pulling down the graven image that the king has fixed, against the law, over the great gate of the temple. The young men do it in broad day. And Herod, dying, has them burned alive on the very night. Josephus notes that the moon was eclipsed. We will honor those young men. And we will follow Herod to his own end. Let us take up the story.
At this, the mood of the assembly changed. The people felt deep pity for Antipater, because his tears and sorrowful expression made them share in his misery, so much so that even his enemies were moved to compassion. It was also plain that Herod himself was inwardly affected, although he did not want anyone to notice it. Then Nicholas took up the accusation that the king had begun, and he pursued it with great severity. He gathered together all the evidence that had come from torture and from testimony. Above all, he strongly praised the king's virtues, especially the care he had shown in maintaining and educating his sons, though he had gained no benefit from it, and had instead fallen from one misfortune into another. Nicolaus said he was not so surprised by the rash conduct of Herod's earlier sons, because they had been young, and had also been corrupted by wicked advisers. Those advisers had caused them to forget the just claims of nature, because they wanted to come into power sooner than they ought. But he said, he could not help being rightly astonished at the dreadful wickedness of Antipater. Antipater had received such great benefits from his father that they ought to have calmed his mind, yet he could not be subdued any more than the most poisonous serpents. Even serpents can sometimes be softened, and will not bite those who have done them good. But Antipater had not let the misfortunes of his brothers hold him back, and had gone on to imitate their cruelty. Yet you, Antipater, as you yourself have confessed, were the one who informed against their wicked actions, searched out the evidence against them, and brought about the punishment they suffered when they were discovered. We do not say this to accuse you of being so zealous in your anger against them. What astonishes us is your effort to imitate their corrupt conduct. From this we see that you did not act for your father's safety, but for the destruction of your brothers. By showing an outward hatred of their impiety, you hope to be believed a lover of your father, and so gain enough power to do evil with complete impunity. Your own actions prove this design. It is true that you removed your brothers because you exposed their wicked plans, but you did not hand over to justice those who had been partners with them. By doing so, you made it clear to everyone that you had made a covenant with those partners against your father. You chose to accuse your brothers, because you wanted for yourself alone the advantage of plotting to kill your father, and so to enjoy a double pleasure, one truly worthy of the evil character you openly showed against your brothers. For that reason you rejoiced, as if you had performed a most glorious deed, and such behavior was not unworthy of you. But if your intention was different, then you are worse than they were. While you were planning to hide your treachery against your father, you hated them, not because they were plotting against him, for then you would not have fallen into the same crime yourself, but because they were heirs to his dominions, and were more worthy of that succession than you. You wanted to kill your father after your brothers, so that the lies you had raised against them would not be detected. And so that you would not suffer the punishment you deserved, you meant to inflict that punishment on your unhappy father. You devised a kind of parricide so strange that the world had never seen its like. You, his son, not only formed a treacherous design against your father, but did it while he loved you and had done you good. He had made you, in reality, his partner in the kingdom, had openly declared you his successor, had not forbidden you already to taste the sweetness of authority, and had given you a firm hope for the future by his own decision and the security of a written testament. Yet you did not judge these things according to your father's changing disposition, but according to your own thoughts and desires. You wanted to take from your too indulgent father the part that still remained to him, and you tried by your deeds to destroy the man whom in words you pretended to preserve. Nor were you satisfied with being wicked by yourself. You filled your mother's head with your schemes, stirred up disturbances among your brothers, and had the boldness to call your father a wild beast, while your own mind was more cruel than any serpent. From that mind you set poison among your nearest relatives and greatest benefactors. You invited them to help and protect you, and you fenced yourself in on every side, through the contrivances of both men and women, against an old man, as though your own mind were not by itself strong enough to sustain so great a hatred as you bore him. And now you appear here, after free men, household servants, men, and women have been tortured and examined because of you, and after the statements of your fellow conspirators, hurrying to contradict the truth. You have thought up ways not only to remove your father from the world, but also to annul the written law that stands against you, the virtue of Varus, and the very nature of justice. Indeed, your shamelessness is such, and you rely on it so much, that you ask to be tortured yourself. You claim that those already examined under torture were made to tell lies, so that those who delivered your father may not be allowed to have spoken the truth, while your own tortures may be treated as the discoverers of truth. Will you not, Varus, deliver the king from the injuries of his own kindred? Will you not destroy this wicked wild beast, who has pretended kindness to his father in order to destroy his brothers, while he alone is ready to seize the kingdom immediately, and proves himself the bloodiest butcher of them all toward his father? You know that parricide is a general injury both to nature and to common life, and that the intention to commit parricide is not inferior to the act itself. Whoever does not punish it injures nature itself. Nicholas added what concerned Antipater's mother, and everything she had chattered about like a woman. He also spoke about the predictions and sacrifices relating to the king, and about whatever Antipater had done loosely while drinking and in his love affairs among Pharos's women. He brought up the examinations under torture and all the testimony of the many witnesses, which was of several kinds. Some of the evidence had been prepared beforehand, and some came from sudden answers, but all of it further declared and confirmed what had already been shown. Some men had known nothing of Antipater's practices, while others had known but kept silent out of fear. When they saw that he was exposed by the accusations of earlier witnesses, and that the great good fortune which had supported him until then had plainly betrayed him into the hands of enemies whose hatred was now insatiable, they told everything they knew about him. His ruin was now hurried on, not so much by the hostility of his accusers as by his own gross, shameless, and wicked designs, and by his ill will toward his father and his brothers. He had filled their house with disturbance, and caused them to murder one another. He was neither fair in hatred nor kind in friendship, except as far as it served his own advantage. Many people had seen all this long before, especially those who were naturally disposed to judge matters by the rules of virtue, because they were used to deciding affairs without passion. Until now, however, they had been restrained from making any open complaint. Once permission was given, they brought forward publicly everything they had known. These proofs of wickedness could not be disproved, because the many witnesses did not speak out of favor to Herod, nor had they been forced to keep silent by suspicion of danger to themselves. They spoke what they knew because they thought such actions extremely wicked, and believed Antipater deserved the greatest punishment, not so much for Herod's safety as because of the man's own evil character. Many things were also said by a great number of people who had no obligation to say them at all. As a result, Antipater, who was usually very clever in lying and in brazen impudence, could not answer a single word. When Nicholas had finished speaking and had produced the evidence, Varus ordered Antipater to begin his defense, if he had prepared anything by which it might appear that he was not guilty of the crimes charged against him. Varus said that he himself desired, and knew that Antipater's father likewise desired, that Antipater should be found entirely innocent. But Antipater fell on his face and appealed to God, and to all men as witnesses of his innocence, asking that God would show by some clear signs that he had not laid any plot against his father. This is the usual practice of people who lack virtue. When they set about wicked undertakings, they act according to their own desires, as if they believed God had no concern with human affairs. But once they are found out and are in danger of suffering the punishment due for their crimes, they try to overthrow all the evidence against them by appealing to God. That was exactly what Antipater now did. He had done everything as though there were no God in the world, but when justice pressed him on every side, and when he had no legal proof by which he could disprove the accusations against him, he shamelessly abused the majesty of God. He claimed that it was by God's power that he had been preserved until then, and he brought before them all the dangers he had ever undergone while boldly acting for his father's preservation. When Varus asked Antipater what he had to say in his own defense, he found that Antipater had nothing to offer except an appeal to God. Seeing that this would go on without end, Varus ordered the potion to be brought before the court, so that he could see whether it still had any power. When it was brought in, Varus commanded that a man already condemned to death should drink it, and the man died at once. Varus then rose, left the court, and the next day went away to Antioch, where he usually lived, because that city was the palace of the Syrians. After this Herod put his son in chains. What Varus said to Herod was not generally known, nor were the words that led him to leave. Still, people commonly believed that whatever Herod later did concerning his son was done with Varus's approval. After Herod had bound his son, he sent letters about him to Rome to Caesar, along with messengers who could also tell Caesar in person about Antipater's wickedness. At this same time a letter from Antipholus to Antipater was seized. It had been written from Egypt, where Antipholus lived. When the king opened it, he found that it said this: "I have sent you Acme's letter, and I have risked my own life to do it, for you know that, if I am discovered, I am in danger from 2 families. I wish you success in your affair." This was what the letter contained. But the king also searched for the other letter, since it had not yet appeared. The slave of Antipholus, who had brought the letter that had been read, denied that he had received any other one. While the king was still uncertain, one of Herod's friends noticed a seam in the slave's inner coat and a fold in the cloth, for the slave was wearing 2 coats. He guessed that the letter might be hidden inside that fold, and this proved to be true. They took out the letter, and its contents were these. Acme to Antipater. I have written the sort of letter to your father that you asked me to write. I have also made a copy and sent it, as though it came from Salem, to my lady Livia. When you read it, I know that Herod will punish Salem as someone who has plotted against him. This supposed letter from Salem to her lady had been composed by Antipater. Its meaning came from him, and it was written in Salem's name, but the words were Acme's. The letter itself said this. Acme to King Herod. I have done my best to make sure that nothing done against you is hidden from you. Therefore, when I found a letter from Salem written against you to my lady, I copied it and sent it to you at risk to myself, but for your benefit. The reason she wrote it is this: she wants to be married to Silius. So tear this letter to pieces, so that my life will not be put in danger. Acme had also written to Antipater himself and told him that, in obedience to his command, she had written to Herod as though Salem had suddenly formed a complete plot against him, and that she had also sent a copy of a letter as though it came from Salem to her lady. Acme was a Jew by birth and a servant of Julia, Caesar's wife. She did this because of her friendship for Antipater, after he had corrupted her with a large gift of money, so that she would help his destructive designs against both his father and his aunt. Herod was astonished by Antipater's enormous wickedness. He was ready to order him killed immediately, as a man who caused disorder in the most serious matters, who had plotted not only against him, but also against his sister, and who had even corrupted servants of Caesar himself. Salome urged him on, beating her breast and telling him to kill her if he could produce any credible evidence that she had acted in that way. Herod also sent for his son, questioned him about the matter, and told him to contradict the charge if he could and not hold back anything he had to say in his defense. When Antipater had not a single word to say, Herod told him that, since he had been caught in villainy on every side, he should delay no longer but reveal the people who had joined him in these wicked plans. Antipater put all the blame on Antipholus, but revealed no one else. Herod was thrown into such deep grief that he was ready to send his son to Rome, so that he could give Caesar an account of these wicked schemes. But he soon became afraid that Antipater might escape danger there through the help of his friends. So he kept him bound as before, and sent more ambassadors and letters to Rome to accuse his son, including an account of the help Acme had given him in his wicked plans, together with copies of the letters already mentioned. Herod's ambassadors hurried on to Rome, but before they went they sent ahead, as they had been instructed, the answers they were to give to any questions asked of them. They also carried Herod's letters with them. Meanwhile Herod fell ill. He made his will and left his kingdom to Antipas, his youngest son, because Antipater's slanders had filled him with hatred against Archelaus and Philip. He also left 1,000 talents to Caesar, and 500 to Julia, Caesar's wife, as well as to Caesar's children, friends, and freedmen. He divided his money, revenues, and lands among his sons and their sons. He made his sister Salome very wealthy, because she had remained loyal to him in every condition and had never been reckless enough to do him harm. Since Herod had no hope of recovery, and was about 70 years old, he became savage and gave way to the bitterest anger at every occasion. The reason was that he thought he was being despised, and that the nation was glad at his sufferings. In addition to this, he was enraged by a sedition stirred up against him by some lower-class men. The occasion was this. There were two men, Judas the son of Seriphus and Matthias the son of Margalothus, among the most eloquent of the Jews, and the most famous interpreters of the Jewish laws. They were beloved by the people because they taught the young. Everyone who was eager to pursue virtue attended their lectures every day. When these men saw that the king's illness could not be cured, they urged the young men to tear down all the works the king had erected contrary to the law of their fathers, and so gain the rewards the law gives for such acts of piety. They said that Herod's other misfortunes, and this strange disease now afflicting him, had truly come upon him because of his rashness in making things forbidden by the law. Judas and Matthias accused him especially because he had set up over the great gate of the temple a large golden eagle, of great value, and had dedicated it to the temple. But the law forbids those who intend to live by it to set up images or representations of any living creature. These teachers therefore persuaded their scholars to pull down the golden eagle. They argued that, even if the danger brought them to death, the virtue of the deed would be far better for them than the pleasures of life. They would die for preserving and observing the law of their fathers. They would gain everlasting fame and praise, be honored by the present generation, and leave to posterity an example of life that would never be forgotten. Since the common calamity of death cannot be avoided by living in order to escape danger, those who love virtuous conduct should wait for that fatal hour by behaving in a way that carries them out of the world with praise and honor. Such brave actions would greatly soften death, even though they brought men into danger of it, and would leave behind a reputation useful afterward to their children and all their relatives, men and women alike. With speeches like these they stirred the young men to act. Then a report reached them that the king was dead, which strengthened the teacher's persuasion. In the middle of the day they went up to the place, pulled down the eagle, and cut it to pieces with axes while a great crowd of people was in the temple. When the king's captain heard what was happening, he supposed the affair was more serious than it really was. He came up with a large body of soldiers, enough to stop the crowd that was tearing down what had been dedicated to God. He fell on them unexpectedly, while they were engaged in this bold attempt with foolish confidence, rather than careful foresight, as crowds usually do, and while they were disordered and not watching out for their own safety. He seized no fewer than 40 of the young men, who had the courage to stay behind when the others fled, together with the authors of the attempt, Judas and Matthias. They thought it shameful to withdraw when he approached. Hatton led them to the king. When they came before Herod, he asked whether they had been so bold as to pull down what he had dedicated to God. Yes. What was planned we planned, and what has been done we did. We did it with the virtuous courage that becomes men. We have helped the things dedicated to the majesty of God, and we have acted on what we learned by hearing the law. No one should wonder if we think the laws that Moses received from God, wrote down, and left behind are more worthy of obedience than your commands. Therefore we will gladly undergo death and every kind of punishment you can inflict on us, since we know in ourselves that we will die, not for any unrighteous deed, but for our love of religion. They all spoke in this way, and their courage remained equal to their words, just as it had been equal to the readiness with which they began the undertaking. The king ordered them to be bound and sent them to Jericho. He then called together the principal men among the Jews. When they arrived, he had them assemble in the theater. Because he could not stand, he lay on a couch. He recounted the many labors he had long endured for their sake, and especially his building of the temple, and how enormous the expense had been to him. He said that the Assammonians, during the 125 years of their rule, had not been able to accomplish so great a work for the honor of God. He had also adorned it with very valuable gifts, and for that reason he hoped he had left himself a memorial and secured a reputation after his death. Then Herod cried out that these men had not even refrained from insulting him while he was still alive. In broad daylight, and in sight of the multitude, they had abused him so far as to attack what he had dedicated, and by that insult, pull it down to the ground. They pretended, he said, that they had done it to insult him, but if anyone considered the matter truly, he would find that they had committed sacrilege against God. Because the people knew Herod's savage temper and feared that he would treat them cruelly and punish them, they said that what had been done had happened without their approval. They added that, in their judgment, the men who had carried it out might rightly be punished for it. Herod dealt more gently with the others in the assembly, but he removed Matthias from the high priesthood, regarding him as partly responsible for what had happened, and appointed Josar, the brother of Matthias's wife, as high priest in his place. During the time when this Matthias held the high priesthood, another man had been made high priest for a single day, on the very day that the Jews observed as a fast. The reason was this. On the night before the fast was to be kept, Matthias the high priest dreamed that he had intercourse with his wife. Because of that he could not perform the sacred service himself, so Joseph, the son of Elymas, who was his kinsman, served in the holy office for him. But Herod removed this Matthias from the high priesthood, and he burned alive the other Matthias, the man who had raised the sedition, together with his companions. That same night there was an eclipse of the moon. Herod's disease now grew much worse, and Josephus says this happened by God's judgment on him for his sins. A slow fire seemed to burn inside him. It did not show itself so much outwardly to the touch as it increased his inward pains. It gave him an intense craving for food, and he could not keep from satisfying it with one kind of food or another. His bowels were ulcerated, and the worst of his pain was in his. A watery, clear fluid had settled around his feet, and the same kind of trouble affected the lower part of his belly. Worse still, his genitals had rotted and bred worms. When he sat upright, he had trouble breathing. This was especially disgusting because of the stench of his breath and the rapid way it came. He also had convulsions through his whole body, and these gave him a strength that was unbearable. Those who claimed skill in divination, and who were thought wise enough to foretell such things, said that God had inflicted this punishment on the king because of his great impiety. Still, Herod continued to hope for recovery, though his sufferings seemed greater than anyone could endure. He sent for physicians, and did not refuse to follow the treatments they prescribed for his relief. He crossed beyond the river Jordan and bathed in the warm baths at Calero. These waters, besides their other healing qualities, were also suitable for drinking, and they flow into the lake called Asphalteris. At one point the physicians decided to bathe him in a vessel full of oil, and people thought he was just about to die. But when his household cried out in grief, he revived. When Herod no longer had the least hope of recovery, he ordered that every soldier be paid 50 drachmae. He also gave a great deal to their commanders and to his friends. Then he returned to Jericho, where his anger became so violent that he acted in every way like a madman. Although he was close to death, he devised the following wicked plan. He commanded that all the leading men of the entire Jewish nation, wherever they lived, should be summoned to him. A great number of them came, because the whole nation had been called, and everyone heard of the summons. Death was the penalty for anyone who ignored the letters sent to call them. The king was now in a wild rage against them all, the innocent as well as those against whom accusations could be made. When they arrived, he ordered them all to be shut up in the hippodrome. Then he sent for his sister Salome and her husband Alexis. "I shall die in a little while, because my pains are so great. Death itself ought to be borne cheerfully and welcomed by all people. But what chiefly troubles me is that I shall die without being mourned, and without the kind of lamentation that men usually expect at a king's death." Herod knew well the temper of the Jews. He knew that his death would be deeply desired and exceedingly welcome to them, because during his life they had been ready to revolt from him, and to misuse the gifts he had dedicated to God. Therefore he told Salome and Alexis that it was their duty to give him some relief in this great sorrow. If they would not refuse to do what he wanted, he would have a great mourning at his funeral, greater than any king had ever had before. Then the whole nation would mourn from the heart, otherwise, any mourning would be only play-acting and mockery. He therefore asked that, as soon as they saw that he had breathed his last, they should place soldiers around the hippodrome, while the people still did not know he was dead. They were not to announce his death to the multitude until this had been done. Instead, they were to order the soldiers to shoot those who were being held in custody with their darts. This slaughter of them all, he said, would let him rejoice on two accounts. First, as he was dying, they would make him certain that his command would be carried out, and second, he would gain the honor of a memorable mourning at his funeral. So, with tears in his eyes, he lamented his condition. He appealed to the kindness they owed him as his relatives, and to the faith they owed to God, and begged them not to deprive him of this honorable mourning at his funeral. They promised that they would not disobey his commands. Anyone can easily recognize the character of this man's mind. It had taken pleasure in what he had formerly done against his own relatives out of his love of life, and it showed the same lack of humanity in these final commands. As he was leaving this life, he took care that the whole nation should be forced into mourning, and should even be left desolate by the loss of their dearest family members. He ordered that one person from every family be killed, even though they had done nothing unjust, had done nothing against him, and had not been accused of any other crimes. Yet people who have any regard for virtue usually lay aside their hatred at such a time, even toward those whom they have rightly considered their enemies. While Herod was giving these orders to his relatives, letters arrived from his ambassadors, who had been sent to Caesar at Rome. When the letters were read, they reported that Caesar had put Agony to death because he was angry at the part she had taken in Antipater's crimes. As for Antipater himself, Caesar left the decision to Herod, allowing him to act both as a father and as a king, and either banish his son or put him to death, whichever he chose. When Herod heard this, he felt somewhat better because the news pleased him. He rejoiced both at Agony's death and at the authority now given him over his son. But his pains had become very severe, and he was faint from needing food. He called for an apple and a knife, since it had formerly been his custom to pare the apple himself, then cut it and eat it. When he had the knife in his hand, he looked around and meant to stab himself with it. He would have done so if his first cousin Josephus had not stopped him, seized his hand, and cried out loudly. A miserable cry then echoed through the palace, and a great commotion arose, as though the king had died. Antipater truly believed that his father was dead. Taking courage from that belief, and hoping to be released at once from his chains and take possession of the kingdom without further delay, he spoke with the jailer about letting him go. He promised the man great rewards, both immediately and in the future, as if that were the only matter still to be settled. But the jailer not only refused to do what Antipater wanted, he also told the king what Antipater intended and how often he had pressed him with such requests. Herod already had no affection or goodwill toward his son to hold him back. When he heard the jailer's report, he cried out, beat his head, though he was at the point of death, raised himself on his elbow, sent for some of his guards, and ordered them to kill Antipater at once, without any further delay, and to bury him dishonorably at Hyrcania. Herod then changed his testament because his mind had changed. He appointed Antipas, to whom he had previously left the kingdom, to be tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, and he gave the kingdom to Archelaus. He also gave Gaulonitis, Trachonitis, and Paeanias to Philip, his son and Archelaus's full brother, under the title of a tetrarchy. To his sister Salome he left Jarnia, Ashdod, and Phasaelis, along with 500,000 drachmae of coined silver. He also made provision for all the rest of his relatives by giving them sums of money and yearly revenues, leaving them all in wealthy circumstances. To Caesar he left 10 million drachmae in coined money, besides vessels of gold and silver, and garments of very great cost. To Julia, Caesar's wife, and to certain others, he left 5 million. After arranging these matters, Herod died on the 5th day after he had caused Antipater to be killed. He had reigned 34 years from the time when he had procured the death of Antigonus, and 37 years from the time when the Romans had declared him king. He was a man of great cruelty toward all people alike, enslaved to his passions, and above any concern for what was right. Yet fortune favored him as much as it ever favored anyone. From being a private man he became a king. Though he was surrounded by countless dangers, he escaped them all, and he continued living to a very old age. But in the affairs of his family and children, although in his own opinion he was fortunate because he was able to conquer his enemies, in my opinion he was very unfortunate. Before the king's death was made known, Salome and Alexis released the people who had been shut up in the hippodrome. They told them that the king had ordered them to go back to their own lands and attend to their own affairs, which the nation regarded as a great benefit. Then the king's death was publicly announced. Salome and Alexis gathered the soldiers together in the amphitheater at Jericho, and first read them Herod's letter, in which he thanked them for their loyalty and goodwill toward him and urged them to show the same loyalty and goodwill to his son Archelaus, whom he had appointed as their king. After this Ptolemy, who had been entrusted with the king's seal, read the king's testament. It was to have force only if Caesar approved it after inspection. Immediately the soldiers acclaimed Archelaus as king. They came forward in companies with their commanders, promising him the same goodwill and readiness to serve that they had shown to Herod, and they prayed that God would assist him. When this was finished, they prepared Herod's funeral. Archelaus took care that the procession to his father's tomb should be extremely magnificent, and he brought out all Herod's ornaments to adorn the funeral display. The body was carried on a golden bier embroidered with many kinds of very precious stones. It was covered with purple, as was the body itself. Herod had a diadem on his head, with a crown of gold above it, and a scepter in his right hand. Around the bier were his sons and his many relatives. Next came the soldiers, distinguished by their several countries and names. They were arranged in this order: first his guards, then the band of Thracians, after them the Germans, and next the band of Galatians, each dressed in military equipment. Behind these marched the whole army, in the same manner as when they went out to war, and were drawn up by their muster masters and centurions. After them came 500 of his household servants carrying spices. They went 8 furlongs to Herodium, for Herod had commanded that he be buried there. In this way Herod's life ended. Archelaus showed his father so much respect that he continued mourning until the 7th day, since that is the number of days appointed for mourning by the law of our fathers. After he had given a feast to the multitude and ended his mourning, he went up into the temple. Wherever he went, he was met with acclamations and praise, each person trying to outdo the rest in shouting the loudest. He climbed a high platform that had been made for him, sat on a golden throne, and spoke kindly to the multitude. I receive your acclamations and the signs of your goodwill with great joy. I thank you for not holding my father's injuries against me. I will try not to fall behind you in properly rewarding your eagerness to serve me. For now, however, I will refrain from taking the name of king. I will receive the honor of that dignity if Caesar confirms and establishes the testament my father made. For that reason, when the army wished to place the diadem on me at Jericho, I would not accept that honor, though it is usually so greatly desired, because it is not yet clear that the one chiefly responsible for granting it will give it to me. Still, by accepting the government, I will have the power to reward your kindness, and in everything that concerns you I will try to prove myself better than my father. The multitude, as is usual, supposed that the first days of a new ruler show the intentions of the one who accepts power. The more gently and courteously Archelaus spoke to them, the more highly they praised him, and they began to ask him to grant what they wanted. Some cried out for him to reduce some of their yearly payments. Others asked him to release those whom Herod had imprisoned, who were many and had been put there at different times. Still others demanded that he remove the taxes that had been harshly laid on goods publicly bought and sold. Archelaus refused none of these requests, because he was pretending to do everything necessary to win the multitude's goodwill, regarding that goodwill as an important step toward preserving the government. After this he offered sacrifice to God, and then went to feast with his friends.
And we will halt there, at the grave of Herod the Great, carried in gold and purple to the Herodium, mourned by an army, and by almost no one else. Consider the man Josephus leaves us, the builder of the temple, whose gates he defiled, the friend of Caesar, who murdered his wife, his brother-in-law, and 3 of his sons, the last of them 5 days before his own death. The great Cain and the ruined man are one, and the book will not let us pretend otherwise. Next time, in part 3, the burying is barely done before the killing resumes. The people gather to mourn the bound teachers and to demand justice. Herod's heir Archelaus answers them, at Passover, with cavalry in the temple courts, and the whole quarrelsome family sails for Rome to fight over the will before Caesar, while 50 envoys of the nation follow to beg Rome for something none of the Herods will give them. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly. One last thing before you go. There is a part on our stage still wanting a voice, and it may as well be yours. Come and read for us at footnotesandfolly.click, and be in the next telling rather than only watching it. And before the lamp goes out, a small request. If something tonight taught you, or surprised you, or simply delighted you, do leave a comment and tell me what it was. And if there is a work, an author, or a tale you should like me to take up next, set it down there as well. I read every one, and many an episode has begun its life as a viewer's suggestion. Until next time.